Welcome to the World Football Summit podcast, the show for football industry leaders who want to stay ahead of the game. We bring you the latest insights, trends, and stories from the experts driving innovation and progress in sports business worldwide. Join us as we dive deep into the ideas and initiatives transforming the world of football. From sustainability and innovation to player development, fan engagement, and everything in between. Our goal is to unite the global football industry and drive positive change and progress.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, CMO at World Football Summit. Today, we bring you back to WFS Americas and share an amazing panel that discussed partnerships in women's football. With the growth of the women's game, current and projected, seems like the perfect time to share this with you. Christina Taylor from A Sky High Talent, Alex Singer from the Houston Dash, Richard Feuz from the Chicago Red Stars, Ryan Dell from Louisville FC, and Tatiana Briseño from the Marketing Jersey share the stage for a conversation that covered the global growth and investment in strategic partnerships around women's football, the vital role player care and support systems play in overall performance, brand building and personal development, globalization and market expansion, media rights and accessibility. This was a fantastic 360-degree view into the women's football partnership model. Before we go into it though, don't forget to subscribe and rate podcasts on your platform of choice and share it with your industry colleagues. You can also subscribe to our newsletter, where every week we send updates, trends, and everything that goes on at our events. You can find a link in the show notes. We're just a couple of months away from WFS Europe in Sevilla, where we will definitely be talking much more about women's football and the business around it. It's going to take place in September 18th and 19th. You can't miss it. Tickets are available on our website. Nothing else from my side. I hope you enjoy this panel from World Football Summit Americas. Let's welcome the panelists to the show.
I'm really pleased to welcome each and every one of you to Mexico and to this panel. I'm sure this will be a great conversation. So starting right now, 2023 was a huge year for women in sports, and each year it keeps getting better. Deloitte forecasts that in 2024, for the first time, women's elite sports will generate a revenue that surpasses $1 billion. A 300 increase on the industry's evaluation in 2021. So I'm starting with the first question, whoever wants to respond, and that's: how have you managed this global growth within your clubs and in the management industry in your case?
So I work, for context for everyone here, I work with players primarily in the UK, so I've got Mary Earps, who is the England national team goalkeeper and plays for Man United. Laura Coombs, who plays for Manchester City and was part of the Lionesses team, and also Siobhan Wilson, who plays for Birmingham in Jamaica. And I guess it's twofold for me, because I have a player right at the top of the game, one of the biggest names at the moment in women's football. Everything's great for her. I have Laura Coombs, who's a team who's just challenged for the title, but sadly lost on the last day of the WSL. And I have Siobhan Wilson, who is in the Championship. And there's a stark difference. So I've noticed, for instance, with Mary, I mean, she's at Man United. I started with her 3 years ago. She had 50,000 followers on Instagram. And my job was to grow her in order to make her commercially attractive, I guess, and look towards what retirement can look like for her. And we were really struggling. It took us 8 months for us to get her first brand deal. Now, honestly, I'm emailed every day, as you can imagine. But the same thing isn't happening for the likes of Siobhan Wilson. It does, because we managed to grow her from, when I met her, she had 6,000 followers on Instagram. Now she's got 1.5 million between TikTok and Instagram. So in terms of a PT, that's what we built her as a PT. Yeah, she makes at least £150,000 a year on social media. But that's as a PT. When we're looking at it from a football perspective, she's not getting those opportunities. And it's the same with Laura Coombs. We're working on building her. We get her on TV sometimes. We've managed to get her on TV. We get the odd bit and bobs. But if you're not at the top of the game right now, from my experience in England, there's a huge disparity. So we look at it and we think that things are getting better. From my perspective and a commercial perspective, in women's football, and it definitely is. And I see the growth, but there's still a huge disparity, and the growth is a lot slower at the bottom of the pyramid.
Thank you, Christina. I think for us at the Dash, obviously I primarily work on the sporting side, but we work very closely with the rest of the front office. Obviously, the World Cup in 23, I think some of the things that emerged most out of that were that the product was so strong. It really captured very big audience, obviously, if you look at the ratings. And we have seen an interest and an uptick in terms of leveraging corporate sponsorships because they want to be involved. We see people and companies that want to invest in women's sport. They see the opportunity, and it makes a big difference for a club when we're growing and we're cohesively building a club. That's important too, because even though we're working on the sporting side, we're working on constructing rosters, building out strategy, how we want to play. It's very technical, but at the same time, we have to align our growth, which I know we'll probably get into some conversations about how we do that and why we sign players at different rates and what the transactions are. But it has to go hand in hand with how the corporate side and the business side of the club is working. There needs to be a cohesiveness. So we've seen a lot of growth on the sporting side in terms of interest in coming over to the NWSL, for example, and some of the things that have changed in the past year, such as increasing our salary cap, have allowed us to now acquire players that maybe we weren't able to in the past. And then on the other side of it, in terms of the business operations, like I said, the World Cup in general, I think really opened a lot of eyes in terms of how corporations and organizations and sponsors can utilize women's football as a platform to reach their objectives. Thank you, Alex.
I've been there for only 5 months. From that, what I can say from the US is just that having an ownership committed to develop something, not only on the pitch, but also off the pitch, because you can pay more to your player, but if you don't invest in what is around the player, what we call here player care, it's not worth it. It's not only all about infrastructure, all about things, the 24 hours of a player life. From my European background, I think I come from a Spanish background. I've been working for 7 years in Switzerland. I think if you take the example of Spain, 10 years ago, it was so far from where they are now. And I think it's only through investment and believing in grassroots and young players, investing in people, that they succeed on that. And if I take my example in Switzerland, when we built the club 7 years ago in Switzerland, during the first season, salary of the player was just zero. And now they're just earning a decent salary, not what they can earn now in the US. But it's all about investment, communication, and commitment, and believing in this project. I think if we take now the example of Mexico, what Mexico is living now with the youth team, I think Mexico is showing that investing in young players is working, because now in the youth team, Mexico has maybe won U16, U17, even U20. They finished in the final against France in the Athletics Cup. I think they're showing that they are now one of the best youths in the world. So basically, I think it's all about investment and commitment and believing in women's soccer.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm going to take you back to my experience in 2015 when I first got to the national team. Players were housed in double rooms. They were flying commercial. And the first charter that group really ever took was to the World Cup in Canada. And now you think about where that group has come. There's an equal pay collective bargaining agreement that was signed just a few years ago. They're selling out stadiums. Almost nearly every game the national team is sold out. And how is that translated to the NWSL? It's shown the growth in the product. Now you have a new TV deal. You have sponsorships that are coming in from massive organizations that are investing into that, and that's allowing things like the salary cap to increase. The investment is there from owners. Clubs are being bought, like the Ricketts, and increasing what we're building in the NWSL. I think that's where the growth has come. It's come from a very baseline piece to now being on television every single week, on ESPN, all these things. I think that's what the growth is, and that growth is going to continue as exposure and ratings and investment from ownership grows.
Just to piggyback on that, speaking about just player care in general. So I played in the NWSL a decade ago, and I lived with a host family, like a college transfer student or something. And obviously the league has come such a long way, and we're really proud of that, even though we have such a long way to go. But you speak about investment and what's around the player. when we're able to bring world-class players now to the league, we have to think about what we're doing to support them around them. And with the growth that we've experienced and seen, the commitment from really, really strong ownership groups that really care about what the clubs are doing, has enabled us to do that and really put this holistic support system around players. And we wouldn't be able to do that in terms of an operating budget, for example, and the revenue side if there wasn't that commitment and growth.
I think, Tatiana, before even with that, you talk about international players and supporting them. I think you see the rise of the youth player as well, right? I think the panel previous to this talked about that. Youth players are having to be supported at a different level, whether it's high school, whether it's family, moving families into their environment. And now you have that investment to support those. And now that I think you're going to see even greater grow academies and youth players in this league.
Yeah, I really think we have great examples here in Mexico. Maria Sanchez, Jan Ordóñez, that actually go to the NWSL because they know that the logistics, the team management, all of the stuff they are going to have, it's so much bigger than we actually have here in Mexico. We are growing fast and we are growing strong, but we are, in terms of team management and maybe administration, a bit far from the NWSL. And that's a really interesting point of view for the players to go and play there. And Ryan, over the past 12 to 18 months, Racing Louisville has brokered a few deals with Mexican club Tigres, Uchito Racing, Alex to Tigres, and Tembi also to Tigres. What are some of the things you, as a general manager, consider when analyzing just this type of global transactions amongst clubs?
Yeah, and I'm going to add one name to that. Carmelina Moscato, who is the head coach of Tigres, is now our assistant as well. So we're happy to have Carm in Louisville. I think when you look at it from a general manager's perspective, it's kind of casting that net. We have the smallest kit in Louisville of any team in the NWSL, so we have to think a little differently. So for us, it's been casting a wide net to look at players. You look at Uchenna Kanu, you just mentioned, obviously a Nigerian player who I think has started kind of a recent trend in some areas of African players coming. You talk about Barbara Banda, Temwa Chewinga, I'm going to miss a few. But there's this trend of players making an immediate impact in the league, and you're starting to see that from our perspective. It's how do we cast this wide net to find the best players that are being developed not only in the United States but globally. And with that, it's data, it's personality checks, it's what our technical staff has seen on video. So when we go to evaluate those decisions, it's a broad spectrum of things that go into that evaluation process for recruitment.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And talking about globalization as a brand strategist in the women's game, what are like the key insights or strategies do you believe are crucial for female footballers to really effectively build their personal brand? Because I think what we saw in Australia last year, in France, really let us like know that the players have to build their personal brand in order to have so much more like income opportunities. So at this point, what do you think they are like these key insights they need to grow or they need to focus on?
There's a few things in that. So one thing that I'm always trying to explain to people is that I personally feel that having a brand strategist alongside an athlete is key if you want them to succeed as a brand. A lot of the time, with all due respect, most agents don't understand the complexities of it. And just for context, and to give you an example, like I was at Instagram headquarters in London the other day with the head of athletes for Europe, Middle East and Africa. And I was speaking to him because they only work with 400 athletes across EMEA. And Mary's one of them. And we're looking at all of her analytics, what content is performing best. We're looking at what time she should be posting. A lot more in-depth data than what we'll get from just her personalized dashboard, right? And he spoke to me about the fact that Cristiano Ronaldo's team's having that meeting every week. Now, if we look at female players, a lot of them don't even have access to the athlete managers at the platform. We're constantly in communication with TikTok and Instagram to understand what we can do to make sure that we're bettering our athletes' brands. The part beside that is that obviously I don't feel like football agents understand that, and to be fair, I don't think they have the time for that. So I think it's really important to have someone to work as that middle person, but it's crucial. The most successful ventures I've had with any athlete is when I have direct access to the athlete, because the communication is a lot easier, and me understanding them as a person means that I can make decisions or seek things out in a much easier and seamless manner. I also think that it's crucial to understand that we're in a space at the moment where, from research shows that women's football fans follow the player more so than the club. So they're more invested in the player. And if we look at research again, we see that I think it's 74% of the household purse is held by a female. So if we've got females following women's football, there's an incredible market for those players that can be accessed. So one of the things that I think is incredibly important, which is why I encourage Mary to start her clothing line, is these athletes themselves personally selling to their audience and building their brand to sell to their audience and monetizing that so that they can hold a career long term, whether it's in business or whether it's beyond that and they want to do punditry or whatever it is.
And I think there's still this stigma that the players maybe don't have to pay so much attention to social media. It's like, don't focus on that, focus on your player career. There are some negative comments, harassment on social media. How to handle just these situations about the negativity that sometimes people get to the players because they are actually active in social media?
I think from my experience, it's dependent. So during a period of time where, say, for instance, a player knows they've had a bad game, it's best to stay off social media, right? But then it's also working directly with the club. So we'll work directly with the clubs to make sure that if there's any particular, like we've had stalkers, we've had people we've had specific people that are continuously commenting bad things, negative things, harassment. We work with the club to make sure that they deal with that immediately. So I think it's also about good club relations and just encouraging the player to understand the end goal, because I've actually had this with a couple of players recently where they felt very self-conscious about balancing the playing career and the commercial. And I think in the women's game, especially in Europe, there is a lot more space for personality than there is in the men's game. And it's just about encouraging them to understand that, especially in the women's game in the UK, from my experience, we're in a space, it's uncharted territory. We've not seen women's football on this platform yet. So it's down to these girls. And from my perspective and in my humble opinion, these lionesses, they've got the opportunity to shape what that looks like for future generations, because it's never been done. So it's just about being brave and obviously making sure that it doesn't conflict with their football. If they are having a bad, we don't post before games, we don't post after games, we don't post international duty, we don't post when they're on tour. You've got to be very conscious and toe that line. But it's just encouraging them to be change makers and break that ceiling and try their best to, move forward and believe in the cause.
Thank you. And just talking about the transition from Europe to US, I think, Richard, you are an expert on that. You recently decided to join the NWSL and Chicago Red Stars as a general manager. So what made you decide to leave Europe and land in the NWSL? And what are some of the things you are seeing that the world should know about the NWSL?
I think, first of all, it wasn't leaving Europe for the US. It was resigning from my project. I spent 8 amazing years in Geneva. I wanted a new challenge, and then I took the time to think where I wanted to be for the next few years. I took the time. I'm blessed and honored. I've been lucky to receive many offers, but I wanted to take the time to find the good spot. I believe first in people than in athlete. I always say that I don't have soccer player. I have people who play soccer, and that's a huge difference for me. And in the same way, I wanted to find an ownership or president who think in the same way. So after many discussions, I think it has been Chicago. Why? Because they had this will to empower women, not only women's soccer, but also women's sport, because they also own a women NBA team in Chicago. They know about the sport business. This family is also the owner of the Chicago Cubs for 15 years. And I decided to join to build a new project. I think this project in Chicago was Chicago Red Star had lived different years and difficult years in the last 3 or 4 years. When I got into vet in Geneva, it was the same. So I may be kind of liking that, trying to build a plane where it's already flying. I see that as a new rebuild, as a new project. We're living now a big rebuild. It's kind of a startup in Chicago. So what would be the difference? I think we're lucky to be with Chicago in one of the 2 best leagues in the world, with people committed to develop women's football. And I think when you have people committed to develop women's football and to develop a project and invest in a project, you have good faith that it's going to be a success, not only for Chicago, but for the whole league. And to have a league with so much competitivity and people like Ryan, like Alex around me, I think it's coming in this league really humble and trying to learn from their experience and trying to bring then Chicago to another level.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you. So I think right now what you mentioned of humans before players, and I hope you resound with me, but we as women, first of all, maybe we thought it was like, if I'm not a player, maybe I don't have like a place in the sports industry. And right now we have so much roles as women in sports. So I wanted to ask you, Alex. You were before in an agency too. You had great athletes like Trinity Rodman. And what knowledge that you got when you were an agent are you able to apply now in your role as a general manager?
Yeah, definitely. I think, of course, just the management of people is the first thing. But if we want to talk about Trinity specifically, we can, because I think it's really relevant, and it's relevant in my path and my story, and sort of is a full circle at Houston. I hope all of you are familiar with Trinity Rodman, generational talent who, when I first got to Octagon, I played professionally for 7 years in the U.S., in Europe. I got my master's, and I knew I wanted to do something working with athletes. So at Octagon, when I first got there was actually no women's soccer in the U.S., women's soccer vertical in the U.S. They were working with one player, but it was just a family friend who needed an agent. So we had one female player. When I got there, I mean, basically I said, what are you doing? What are we doing? It's my favorite question. What are we doing? So we spent a lot of time thinking about how we wanted to build out this division, keeping it really small, quality over quantity, and find 1 or 2 players that were generational and that we could build a business around and see where their career took them. We spent a lot of time recruiting and built a great relationship with Trinity and her mom and family. And when we got her, she was, I think, 17, very young. So there were a lot of things to take away from working with a young player, of course, who has a lot of talent in terms of managing expectations, managing their relationship with their coach, working very close with the club. We had to do that, right? Because it was a kid. She was a kid. She, in her rookie season, played out of her mind. She was she had broke the record for rookie goals scored as a rookie. She won the NWSL championship with the Washington Spirit in that year. And after that season, we said, okay, we need to get this girl more. She was on a rookie contract, and we said that there's no way that this is moving forward this way. And we ended up negotiating, at the time, the highest salary in NWSL history. It was a record-breaking deal. She was still very, very young. So then you think about, okay, young player now making a lot of money, managing that in all facets. But I speak about this deal because we said we are gonna be brave. We are gonna push the limit here. We're gonna do this. We worked closely with DC in this instance, and we set the new bar with this deal. So I mentioned that because there were so many experiences gained from working with Trinity and working on the agency side. Now I'm on the other side of the phone with agents, and I love them all. But when I got to Houston, that was still the record-breaking deal. Like I mentioned before, there were a lot of changes last year, and one of those was an increase in the NWSL salary cap. There was also a new introduction of free agency and restricted free agency. And we're talking about striking deals, right, in this panel, and the growth and scaling that growth within women's football. So we had a player, you mentioned her, Maria Sanchez, who you know very well, and we
we were re-signing her to a new deal and worked together to again break the record in signing a player to record-breaking contract, and she was the highest paid player. That record was then broken just a few days later. And I say this again because you see the pace at which this sport is growing, which women's football is growing. Of course, the finances in terms of how we operate within the league and the cap have a lot to do with how we manage our cap and our roster. But when that happened, I mean, it shifted the market, of course, but it was like, okay, boom, 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 we need to lock in these new contracts. This contract broke the record the week after. This free agent signed a big contract the week after. It was important to us as a club, right? You might be saying, you're a GM. Why would you want to sign a record-breaking contract and pay that money? What are you doing? But for us, it was important in different ways. It was important for us to show that we were investing at that level. Houston, I would say, Houston as a club, the Dash has gone through in its 10 years, I would say lack of stability, and we are very young within our project as well. I think it is a market and a club that's been looked at as they're not investing, there isn't a commitment, there isn't an ambition. And also Maria being Mexican-American and Houston being the most diverse city in the country and having a very large Mexican population, there were these dots that we needed to connect to sign her as a very important player. Okay, so you fast forward a little bit into the future, and again, you'll get this circle and why I'm telling all these stories. But we actually traded Maria, so the highest paid player that we set these records against. We actually then traded Maria a few months later and set the record for the highest transfer fee within the NWSL. So in terms of a trade, we acquired the highest amount of allocation money and transfer funds and a few other odds and ends that will help us into the future. So it's, again, breaking a barrier, setting a record, changing the market. The market is exponentially growing. There were transfers into the league this winter that broke records beyond doubling what transfer fees were before. So, okay, what we did with that money is we broke another record and invested that in a young generational talent that we had been scouting for a while that we want to build the team around. We set the record in terms of a Brazilian transfer fee. We transferred Brazilian defender, 20-year-old Tatiana from Corinthians to the Dash. It was I think it's the fourth highest transfer fee in women's football history right now. But for us, again, it's full circle because we, like I said, had been looking at this player and how we were going to utilize these funds and how important striking these deals are and how important it is to push and investing in a player like a 20-year-old Tarcian who has the potential to be the best center back in the world. If you watch women's football, a lot of similarities to a Wendy Renard at 20 years old. So for us, this was a piece that we can build upon now. She's already slotted in and is impacting the team from the get-go at 20 years old, but is also the future. And that's what investment is about. The pace at which women's football is growing is not going to stop. And getting a player like this was so important in terms of how we're building our roster, what our overall strategy is. You know, who knows what's going to happen in 2 years or 3 years' time with Tarcian. We want to develop her at the Houston Dash. We know the impact she can have in terms of on the pitch, off of the pitch. We do have a Brazilian community in Houston as well. And then with the rapid rate at which transfer fees are exponentially growing, you know, you're going to have a player and you talk about investment. Okay, well, what about the return on investment? If you're spending $500,000 on a women's soccer player, this is a player who has the potential to generate a very high ROI for the future. So anyway, there's a really long story, but it starts with Trinity and it doesn't end. That's the point.
And I would like to really know everyone else's point of view on the transfer fees because it's not the norm still, but the transfer fees and the global transactions starting to be like really present around women's football. So how do you like envision this trend or this momentum and what's going to happen in the future with the global transactions?
I think when you're talking about the investment, as we talked about in the beginning of this panel, the investment that continues to increase, television rights, sponsorships, that's going to continue to drive value and things like transfer fees. Alex hasn't broken, I think I had four records on count there. So those things are going to continue to climb. Transfer fees to get players into the league are going to be more expensive. And we have to adapt to that. I think transfer fees going out when we sold Tembi Kelana to Tigres, I believe that was a record transfer out of the league. So I think those are going to continue to climb as viewership goes up, as sponsorship goes up. And it's something that we have to be prepared for and be smart about, because we have to make good decisions on our side to protect the club and bring in good players.
Yeah, maybe I have kind of a different point of view. Maybe coming from Europe, maybe my conviction will change. I believe in the fact to invest more money in women's soccer, obviously. I won't worth the same value on investing money in the salary of my player or investing money in a trade. I will give importance to the trade I can do to another team and get money for my players. Maybe because I come from a team with a huge grassroots, with a huge academy focusing on youth player. I'm not a huge fan. I think we have to be careful also, and that's what we've done in Geneva, is like trying to get to a new standard every single season, obviously for the players, to give them more money every single season. We just have to be careful to don't break the market and don't build like a bubble that then we cannot control. And again, who has the truth? I don't know. But I think trying to build that and be patient. I think something will happen really most often in Europe is trying to compare men's and women's football or soccer. I think that's the biggest mistake in my opinion. As the chance to run a men's and a women's club, we decided to separate the two companies because I think we're playing with the same rules. We're playing the same game, but the economy is different. Obviously now the curve, the dynamic and the curve of growth is bigger in women's soccer. But if we try to compare every single day, and we talk about soccer, but it would be in the different part would be the same. Women's soccer has her proper economy, and we have to believe in this one and try to make it grow patiently and step by step. So again, I think those trades are important, are good for the team. Maybe coming from a club where our vision was to don't pay for players, but take them maybe younger and try to help them to growth. Maybe this opinion will change, but I think at the end of the day, it's great. We just have to be careful, don't break the market and build a bubble that then we cannot control.
Yeah, and I think maybe it all depends on the strategy, like everyone or each one of the clubs or the companies has. And talking about the strategy, how do you in your company like build this momentum also around women's football, the footballers you have, and help them to globalize? Because most of the time it's like, I'm a local girl, maybe no one knows me. So how to globalize these local brands?
So this again is twofold, because I'm working in Europe. So I'm working with girls, bar Siobhan, who are playing for female side of the Premier League teams. And I'm working with Manchester United and Manchester City, which are two of the biggest teams in the world, really. So their commercial value and the visibility of the clubs obviously spill over to the women's team. Not in the same manner it would do with men's player, but it does. So it gives a lot of the women a global platform from the get-go. And I see that through their Instagram demographics, because they're not like 90% UK. It might be 54% UK, and then there's a lot of other countries. Like one of Mary's biggest countries at the moment on her platform is Nigeria, because Man United have a big following in Nigeria, right? So from that perspective, it's a little bit of the job's already done. But from a different perspective, I really believe in the power of social media. Like social media has democratized so much. There's so many pros and cons to social media, but it's democratized so much for so many different people. And it gives everybody an opportunity to share their voice and share who they are in their most unique and authentic way. And that helps to resonate with, you can choose whether you want to target niche communities, or you can choose whether you want to target a more broad community. And I personally think it's down to how you choose to shape the player's brand, what platforms you choose to put them on, and what brands you choose to align them with. So for instance, you know, for any athlete, if you're going to sign an athlete deal, one of the questions that need to be asked from a brand strategist point of view is, how are you going to activate this athlete? Where are you going to put them? Because at the moment, from my perspective in the women's game, the money from an athlete deal is not really worth it compared to what they can make commercially with all the exclusions that they want from it. So the only way that we're going to make that worthwhile is if you're going to activate them on a global scale in a manner that we won't be able to do so ourselves, because the monetary value of it is not really worth it in compared to what we can make otherwise. So it's also about making those strategic decisions for what is right for those individual players. But social media for me is key. Yeah, I could talk about this all day, but
yeah, I think as Billie Jean King says, if you can't see her, you can be her.
100%.
So the platforms are so important right now. And just last year, the NWSL launched record-breaking landscape, partnering with CBS, ESPN, Prime Video, and Scripps Sports. So practically NWSL is going to be watched all over the world. How, from a sports management point of view, this will impact the clubs you work on?
The magnitude of the new league media deal is massive. So the league is 40 times greater than the previous media. The deal, is 40 times greater than the previous media deal. The scale of this is massive. Like I said, it's worth $240 million over 4 years. And for women's football, that's a lot of money in terms of media rights. But the biggest thing besides the dollars being invested is the accessibility. The matches are going to be, and they are being shown on prime time. There's really no way that, there's a way that everybody can watch, whether that's through a stream, whether that's through an Amazon Prime, a CBS, a Paramount Plus. There are so many ways to watch, and the accessibility is so important for awareness and exposure. If you can't find a match, you might not even know it exists. If you need to use a dodgy link to try and get a stream up, you're probably you might get frustrated and close it. The accessibility and the user friendliness of this deal right now is what makes it so impactful beyond the dollars. We need this of course then extends to, because there are hopefully going to be so many more eyes on the league, opens the door to investment again from corporate sponsors. The exposure is going to increase the investment from sponsors, and it's going to continue to build the momentum that we already have, but it's so impactful because it's of the accessibility. And I think that's also what makes the NWSL unique, and women's sport in general, but the NWSL, there is a lot of accessibility to the players, very different in men's sport, I would say in men's football as well. In terms of behind the scenes, what these production companies are doing. So for Houston, for example, in the past, the media deals, there was no shoulder content around the games, for example. The halftime content wasn't what you're getting right now. There was no in the locker room, behind the scenes, what's going on. The storytelling is so important. So what an Amazon Prime or CBS, what the production companies are actually doing through this deal now are letting the consumer in. What are we doing? How do we operate? What are the players like before, after, and in the middle of games? So there are a few things that make this deal so incredibly important, but hopefully summarize a couple of them. And for Houston, showing the world and showing consumers really who we are, what the city is like, is really important to us as we continue to establish ourselves in a relatively new and younger project. Thank you.
I think part of that's exposure. Alex touched on it a little bit, but the exposure of the athlete in the clubs now on CBS, on ESPN, NWSL players are now calling into SportsCenter. You think about it, that's crazy in America. If you have someone tuning in to watch the NFL, the NBA, all these other areas of our market, these players are getting very similar exposure on major sports network that had never happened before. You talk about Amazon Prime being in the locker room and creating a storytelling narrative. That ties into exactly what Christina's talking about. It's a marketability of the player. So now you're seeing the player in a completely different light. And that exposure into the NWSL for the player, for the commercial, for the sponsors, is going to be, again, what continues to drive these massive deals that we talked about today.
I think coming back to the sporting side, I think it's this huge reward. Every huge reward comes with responsibility and duty. So now that we know that all the United States is watching us, that the rest of the world is watching us, we also have, as GM, the responsibility to bring this game in the way our players and our team are performing to the next level. To show them that now that we are broadcasted all around the world, that we can face Champions League, that we can face all those kind of competition. Because when you're on your own market, and this United States market is already huge, but you have to show you can face that. And I think we have this summer tournament against Liga MX, few of those Liga MX club. I think maybe most of the American think that we're going to just destroy those Mexican club. I think we have to be careful with that, because Mexico is doing an amazing job for a few years, and I think we're going to have some surprise. We have to come to this Summer Cup with a lot of humility and then make sure we can show what we're worth. But I think those Mexican clubs will also have the will to show what they're worth. And I think it's going to be really interesting. And even for us to face those clubs from abroad, now it's Mexico, maybe in the future it's going to be, I think Louisville is playing some European club this summer. we're going to be facing more and more, and I think that's going to help us to bring our soccer to another level.
You know, can I add to this? But with increased exposure, like I'm so passionate about the fact that I feel like it's so important to understand the value of the players. Like if I look at this, Allen Iverson for me got me interested in the NBA because I thought he was so cool. Michael Jordan amplifies that. LeBron James amplifies that. Messi amplifies that in football. So I think it's really important for broadcasters, for club or businesses, companies, brands to understand the importance of getting behind those generational talents, amplifying them, because they are the ones that can carry that sport. They are the ones that can amplify that beyond just America, the same way that Messi amplifies across the world, the same way that LeBron James does that for the NBA, the same way that Serena Williams has done it for tennis. I just wanted to...
Well, thank you. And just to close, because the time's up, but I would like to ask each one of you to give me like a word or a sentence where we can like find inspiration to know how can we continue breaking glass ceilings from the club's point of view and from the agency's point of view?
Mine would be just be brave.
Be brave. Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo that. Nothing's off the table, and if you don't try, you won't know.
Thank you.
We have to do this together as well. So that's where between the social, being on the club side, but still working with the agents and the athletes and the broadcast companies, we have to continue to push this together.
I think it's going to be coming from Europe and facing a new culture for a few months. And I think I always believe in the blend of culture. That's the most challenging thing because you have to keep arguing every single day with different mindset. But that's the biggest reward you can have if you achieve blending cultures.
My word's going to be relentless. I think we have to be relentless in the pursuit to push this league forward, to push our clubs forward, to push our sponsors in that pursuit to make this the best league in the world and continue to grow women's football and break these glass ceilings.
Perfect. Well, Ryan, Richard, Alex, Christine, thank you for being here, for sharing your knowledge. And well, thank you for the World Football Summit for having us.